Hello, friends. This is A Level Deeper. I am Chad Miles, and today I am sharing a conversation that I had with a new friend, Robert Joseph. I was introduced to Robert through guest and friend of the show, Miles Santo. And Robert is like a spiritual Batman. Here's a guy who works for a Fortune 100 tech company selling cybersecurity during the day, and by night or evening or weekend is a very spiritual man, as you're going to hear in today's conversation. I asked him about how those two things coexist, and it was really interesting hearing how they come together, and they do. I'll tell you, Robert does not mince his words. He's got some strong messages about healing and some of the work that we as humans and men especially can be doing and should be doing for themselves and their communities. It's pretty much par for the course for this show, and for longtime listeners, this will be not necessarily a surprise, but Robert talks about the G word, God, and how that comes up in his life, in business, and why God is the center of the work that Robert is doing. I'll tell you, this is one of those episodes where Robert would share for a few minutes, and when he was done speaking, I would just sort of sit there and try to think about, wow, what do I ask next? What do I say next? And I did. I said something, and what resulted was a really enjoyable and deep conversation about life and the things that make us who we are. And although at times this conversation can seem like maybe it's heavy or maybe it's focused on more negative things, we bring it back to the positive in the end. And Robert has a really positive outlook for where we're headed. It's all next. I hope you enjoy it. Here's my conversation with Robert Joseph. Okay, Robert, I'm curious about we were just chatting before we started recording, and you were talking about the transition between your day job, cybersecurity sales, and entering into maybe a more storytelling, more spiritual conversation. I'm always curious about the different realms that people exist in, from an outsider's perspective, living in your day job, being cybersecurity sales, reading the things that you write about on Instagram, and you are a very spiritual person. Talk to me about how those two kind of parts of you coexist in what seem like they may be, from an outsider's perspective, kind of different realms, different worlds.
It's a really good question. It's in the spiritual community. Sometimes some people view either or scenario, right? Like, hey, I worked in corporate America, I had this awakening, and now I'm going to drop everything and live off the grid and become a Reiki healer or whatever, right? And that's great. I think some people do that and they do it with success. I always felt that what that does is that leaves you vulnerable, right? And it can, not always, it can lead to some inauthenticity around the spiritual work. So let's say you do become a body worker or a practitioner or whatever it is that you're doing, and this is your life, and you want to make money that way. When there's urgency behind the spiritual work, when there's a neediness, like, how am I going to pay rent if I don't get 30 people at this retreat? You could lose the authenticity of the work. So for me, I always viewed everything as connected. It's not, to me, either this or that. I bring spirituality into my day job, which is technology. Technology is our future. AI is the future. If we don't have the right people behind technology, if we don't have the right organizations, the right management, the right leadership, right? This is the future. This is the next. If there is a World War III, it's going to be technology. So it is the perfect place to position yourself if you're a quote unquote light worker, right? And when I'm not in an executive leadership role within a large technology company, yes, I'm writing about God, I'm writing about love, because this is life. But to me, business is also life. I consider myself like a quantum businessman, and God is the most important thing to me in my life. So I bring God and I bring my heart to everything that I do, including business. And I try to thread the needle, right? and there's a string that attaches to everything in our lives because everything is connected. So all that to say, I never looked at it as an either or. I'll always be doing all of these things under one umbrella, which is bringing God into the workplace and bringing God into my relationships. And I always saw it as one.
It's interesting, you mentioned not wanting to have maybe the sense of urgency to the spiritual work that you are doing. Right now, I'm in the midst of I'm doing a series on my show exploring, I guess, work and exploring the idea and the question of like, should I try to turn a hobby or a passion of mine into my career? Should I try to make it what I do for a living? And exploring, how does that change the relationship to whatever that thing is when we apply this urgency or this need to make an income, make money, fulfill certain needs that we have? Tell me more about how you see that relationship with spiritual work in particular and why you've chosen to not make that, your full-time gig.
Yeah, it's a good question, right? Because, and again, this is just my point of view, right? I also see the point of view of someone saying, "Go, I'm going all in because this is my passion, and if I don't go all in, then I won't really be doing the work." I see both perspectives. This has just been my path, right? I have the opportunity because I have this day job that I built this career for 25 plus years to do this work without that urgency. And what that means is if someone comes to my place, I do body work here on occasion, right? And they say, "How much?" And I say, "We'll talk about that later. Why don't you come here and we'll have a conversation." It is very important to tether these things. It's very money is an exchange, money is spiritual. So I'm not saying I do this work for free. It's how I do it. So for example, someone comes here, we do some body work, and they say, "How do I pay?" On the table in my apartment, I will have brochures. And those brochures will be different ways you can sponsor a child overseas. And I'll say, all I ask is that you sign up for one of these programs that feels the best for you. And you do it at least for a year. And that will be about $350 of your money. And here's what you get back. You'll get a letter from this child, translated every quarter. It'll melt your heart. And this is the way you pay it forward. This is how I would like for you to tether this relationship. Now, I can only do that because I have created this career for myself where $350 is not going to do anything for me. And I'm blessed to say that. But what is it going to do for that child, Chad?
To change their life.
So change their life and change the person who sponsors that child's life. Because trust me, I keep every one of those letters and they've changed my life. So that's why I do it. It gives me the ability to have more freedom in how I structure my spiritual services.
Do you ever find yourself being pulled to want to invest more of yourself into the spiritual work? Do you ever find yourself resenting the work or the day job and thinking, "Oh, if only I could do more"? Asking for a friend, which would be me, as I'm trying to explore like what do I want work in, what role do I want it to play in my life? I tend to apply a lot of pressure to, well, if I enjoy something, if I like it, this podcast, for instance, well, then wouldn't it be nice if I could do it for an income? Wouldn't it be nice if this could be part of my job and I could do this more? I tend to apply that pressure. Do you ever feel that?
Yes, I used to. And I'll tell you a very big turning point for me. So in my company, I've done sales for a long time and I've been successful in sales. And they wanted to highlight me at the company. My life. I don't have a typical life. I work for a Fortune 100 tech company, global. And every time they spotlight an employee, it feels the same and it's beautiful. But it's here's my husband, here's my wife, here's my Labrador, and here's my three kids and my white picket fence. I don't have that life. In my life, I have relationships and stuff like that, but it's been a very pretty solitary journey for me, mostly because I chose it. So I said, look, if you're going to spotlight me, I'm a pretty private guy. I have one rule, and that's it. I'm going to tell you the truth about what my life really is. And I'm going to use the G word. And if you're not comfortable with me using the G word, I don't want to do the spotlight. So they said, of course, if that's what your life, we want you to tell us what you do. So, there's like 800 people on this town hall, and here they come, Robert. This is Robert's life. And I was a little insecure because I don't have, everything that these other people have. And I wasn't sure how it would be received, but I was shocked on how it was received. As I said, here's what I do. I do men's work. I run retreats. I have this land that I bought, and my life is about service because I have a close relationship with God. And I said that in a variety of ways, in multiple fashions, over and over again, which is very taboo, as you know, within corporate America. And at the end of the call, I got a lot of people that reached out to me. And one of them was a C-level executive, said just these words: I envy your way.
Hmm.
Those were his words. I envy your way. And I wasn't sure what that meant. It took me a while to decrypt that. But it showed me one thing: we cannot hide who we are anywhere, any place. Because what happened on that call is I activated dozens of people to say, maybe I need to do more. Because yeah, I have the wife and the husband, and I have the white picket fence and the kids, but I forgot about God. So now after that moment, I said, I don't have to make a choice. I am just going to bring all of this to everyone, no matter what I'm doing in life. And that's the commitment I made to myself, and that's the commitment I made to God. Changed everything.
Hmm. What a powerful moment. What? Why is the G word, God? Why is that the center of what you're doing? Hey, it's Chad here, and this is an ad for this show. I want to personally say thanks for tuning into the podcast. Whether this is your first episode or you've been here for a while, it means a lot that you're here. I'm not asking you for money. Actually, I'm asking for you to take a small action to help grow the show. More specifically, there's 3 things you can do to help grow the show and spread meaningful conversations like the ones that we have here. First is to leave a rating or review for the show on the platform that you're listening on. It takes about 10 seconds and can make a big difference. Number 2 is to subscribe or follow the show on whatever platform you're listening on, just so that you make sure you get notified of each episode that's published. Lastly, number 3 is to share the episode. Whether you send a text to a friend, talk about the episode at your next book club, or make a post on social media, sharing goes a long way to help. So thanks again for listening, and thanks in advance for taking a small action to help the show. Okay, back to the episode.
Because nothing else matters. What happens is the reason why I don't talk too much publicly is because I don't want to create more noise. So everything that you hear, people are talking about biohacks, people are talking about this and that. All they are derivatives of one root, which is God and love. And we get caught up swinging on branches. What we do, we just consume all this information, and it's contradictory sometimes and confusing and separative. But when we actually get to the root of the tree and we're not swinging on the branches, we get to the ultimate truth of who we are and why we're here. And there's nothing to debate. And if someone can speak from that place by turning themselves inside out and realizing God here on earth, you can't debate it. You can't hide from it because it's truth. So I've sat here for years, and in prayer and meditation, I've said, what is the message? If I'm going to speak, what is the message? And I've went all around, zigged and zagged, and the truth, it's this: talk about me. He said, talk about this, return people home, bring my children home. That's all I do. I'm a shepherd, I'm an usher. I get out of the way and I say, it ain't me. I'm not a healer. I can't help you, but I know somebody that can.
Hmm.
And you know as well, and you forgot. So let me help you remember. And then I get out of the way. It's exactly what happened in that meeting at work. I reminded people of a fundamental truth, and that doesn't speak to people's brains. It speaks to their core. And I can only speak to their core and speak to their soul if I myself is speaking from my core and my soul. And that takes work because the brain is resistance. And unless I can master this, I can't even reach my soul.
This relationship between the brain and the heart and the soul, you had written something on your Instagram. It went, "We are here to have high quality experiences. If it doesn't resonate with the heart and soul, we will eventually suffer repercussion." Tell me more about that
Yeah.
relationship between the brain and the heart and soul. I mean, why is it that it's so important that we're having these high quality experiences that resonate with the heart and soul? And what are the repercussions in your mind if we don't?
We lose our soul or the repercussion because we could lie to ourselves. We live in a world where most people are lying to themselves right now. I don't mean that as a generalization. I mean it as an observation. It's easy to lie to yourself and call things that are actually prisons liberation, for example. What we see as liberation is often a prison. And we get caught up in these things. What we see as fighting for social justice is actually the opposite. Because we're still fighting and we're actually pouring gasoline on the fire. There's a lot of illusions out there. I could go down a whole list. Even our sexuality has been harvested. And we think liberation is going around and living life as a hedonistic festival of orgies. Maybe try it out. See what happens when you wake up at 45 and you've been doing that for 30 years, 20 years. Tell me. Because it's very easy to lie to yourself, and that's what the brain does. And if you're not connected with God and you're separated from God, then you are susceptible to things that are not God. And anything that is not God is a lie because God is truth. So if we don't master ourselves and audit every thought that comes into our mind and connect with our emotions in a really honest way and understand our patterns and why we're doing the things that we do, we're going to live a lie. And when you live a lie, you are torturing yourself because your soul will slowly wither away and you cannot run from that for too long. And you will get sick emotionally, physically, and spiritually. So it's very important that we learn how to master our being and get our mind in order because there is a competition for our mind. It's obvious. Everything that you decide to spend time with, television, the music that you listen to, the people that you think you're learning from, you better choose wisely. And the only safe way to know that you're not being hijacked is not to consume anything and be in nature, be with yourself, and be in silence. Because the greatest torture you could do to a man is solitary confinement. My father worked in prisons. He worked in New York City, Rikers Island, one of the worst prisons in the country. And those guys would do anything to avoid sitting with themselves. That's what we're talking about. You don't have to be a physical prisoner, a literal prisoner. We're all walking around as prisoners if we can't sit in silence with ourselves.
You said the way is to not consume anything. That when I hear you say that, that feels, I'm like, well, how would I do that? That feels hard. Or this idea of being in silence with ourselves. I mean, how do we start that process of if a goal or intention is to get to a place where we're not consuming anything? I guess tell me what you mean by that and what does that look like?
Well, look, let's be realistic. We live in a world where it's almost impossible to do that.
Yeah.
Okay. So how does it start? Discretion, discernment. For example, nobody should listen to a word that I say. You should you should feel it in your body. And if it feels good and it touches your heart, then you continue. And your body will tell you. Sometimes I get chills when I listen to the right people. Sometimes my heart lights up, right? I thought I had ADD until I listened to somebody that has a high transmission, and then you can't lose me. So we have to start by using our discernment and saying, is this person walking the walk? Trying to talk to me about God? You're trying to talk to me about self improvement? You're trying to talk to me about relationships? Are they a walking emulation of that? Or are they just trying to make money and sell me a masterclass? Are they living a lie? A lot of these spiritual teachers are phonies, let's be honest. As soon as they have the power and they have the opportunity to have groupies, they fall. And that's where the Antichrist comes, right through your sexuality, right? So we should know that beforehand if someone's real or not. So I think we start by saying there's all of this data out there. Okay. I want the most high quality data from the most high quality real people that are running podcasts, that are talking about different subjects that I'm interested in. We start by discernment. Okay. That gets us on a track. But ultimately, all these people are our reflections, all these people are our guides, right? Back to ourselves. So that road of discernment is leading us back to us. So at some point, we're all going to be alone. We're all going to die alone. And the only way that we reach enlightenment or realization or whatever you want to call it, inner peace, is by looking within.
Feels hard sometimes to do.
Incredibly hard. In fact, during my journey, the one thing that kept coming up to me, Chad, was I know why people don't do this. I get it. There was times where I'm like, is this even worth it? I am. Because the first gate to heaven is hell. You have to go through your personal hell if you really want to grow and develop. You can read all the self-help books you want. It's bullshit. Surface. At the best, it'll move the needle. At the best, it's a breadcrumb to the next breadcrumb. But at the end of the day, you have to go inside, turn the root of your trauma inside out, and alchemize it into power. And in order to alchemize it into power, you got to press on that open wound, and you got to stare at the pain, and you got to stare at your betrayer. Not look at it, not glance at it, stare at it. And that might take you a decade until you could stare at it and not look away and not be afraid and forgive and be at peace with everything that happened to you, because that's the reason we're here. If you live in the past and you're blaming anybody, you have not healed and you're not even close.
Tell me more about that as far as living in the past and blaming other people being a sign that you haven't healed.
We live in a world of victim consciousness, right? It's all about me, what you did to me, right? I'm this color, I'm this gender, I'm this sexuality. These are all identities. What happens is when we associate with that identity, we think that we're special and we should be treated differently. That's not unity consciousness. That's not Christ consciousness. Christ consciousness is who cares? We're all here together at the same time. It's a miracle. What could we do together? Change the world, to collectively shift consciousness. But we have people over here creating division because they consider themselves unique and special and that they are being treated poorly by another person. And although that might be true, it does not matter because we live in a world where people are always going to treat us poorly. Our own parents. I don't know anybody that could say they had the perfect parents because life is not designed that way. We're not perfect beings. So even if your house was perfect, your teacher wasn't perfect. And if your teacher was perfect, the kids in school weren't perfect and they bullied you. And even if all that was great, you got in a relationship with women and a woman hurt you because women aren't perfect. Where do you want to stop? Life is going to kick your ass and it's never going to stop. So at some point, you have to say, this happened to me. I know what that feels like. A great betrayal. Whose responsibility is it to fix, to heal? Not the person that did it to you. because they're unconscious. They were unconscious when they did it to you, and they're probably unconscious now. So you can confront them, and maybe there's some value in that, but it doesn't matter. We are our only savior. And that's why God is so important, because God is a unified field of intelligence that we could tap into. We have to know how to tap into it. If we're a victim, we're not even close to God. But the minute we go into contract, so to speak, with God and say, hey, God, I'm suffering and I feel alone. I need you to help me. That's when everything opens up. And you start all of a sudden attracting people that can help you. Therapists, friends, communities, groups, teachers. And God is going to start working through you. He's going to work around you and he's going to work through you. That is your only hope in this lifetime. If you think when you find that relationship, that person's going to save you, you're wrong. The only thing we could do is meet people that help us look within ourselves so we could save ourselves. There's no cavalry coming. No one is coming to save us. It is an internal process. And you see people marching on the streets and you see people fighting for justice. Show me a time that's ever worked. Maybe there's a few rare examples in history, okay? But most of the time, even think about the most important revolution, perhaps social revolution in this country, peace and love, the hippie revolution. It was only a matter of time. Those peace and loving hippies were lighting shit on fire. And that's every protest you've ever seen. That's almost every march you've ever seen. Of course, there's exceptions because those people aren't right on the inside. How are they going to change anything if they haven't changed themselves? That's the irony. Nobody sees it. You have to walk the walk first. You have to be the change that you want in the world. And then maybe you'll have influence on others.
Yeah, I mean, how would you on a mass scale, if you will, how do we start to right the ship of having more people looking internally, doing this work, maybe recognizing that it's the internal relationship that they have that is the most important thing? How does that change on a big scale? That feels daunting.
One person at a time. That's it. We're all drops in the ocean, right? We're incredibly significant and incredibly insignificant at the same time. But the significance together is everything. There's no ocean without all of our drops. So what is the purity of that water that's dropping into that ocean? Because it could easily turn into sewage if we're not doing our part. So that's what we are, is we have to purify ourselves, each and every one of us. Now, to answer your question more directly, how can I change another? Can I say something to them that changes them? Maybe. Words are cheap, so that rarely happens. Can I tell them what to do? No. But the best way to change somebody, especially men, is to show them. This is how you show. This is how even children. There's a lot of fathers and mothers that are do as I say, not as I do parents. Doesn't work. Children are more intuitive than you and I by miles. And it doesn't change when we become adults. So we have to walk the walk, right? So when we walk into a room, do I have to say, let me tell you my story, Chad? Why don't you sit down? Let me tell you my story. No, you'll know. Men will fall into their rightful place just by being in the presence of elevated men. They will follow organically. You don't have to tell them to follow. They want to be led, but that man has to be authentic. And the only way he's authentic is if he's turned himself inside out and he's a spiritual warrior. He went to war with himself and he came out on top. And he's willing to continue to fight because life is going to continue to come and fear is going to continue to come and darkness is going to continue to come. And he continues to fight. He's not afraid because he crossed the threshold. That's the only way. So if you did that and I did that and all of the people in our community did that, we're activating each other. and we could also deactivate each other. And that's what a lot of the dark forces in this world are doing. And they do it subtly. They do it through frequencies. They do it through music lyrics. They do it through television series. They do it through pornography. So we have to wake up for ourselves so we could all wake up together.
You talked about this internal or spiritual war, battle with ourselves that is required to reach the other side, so to speak. I mean, I've got to imagine this is coming from a place of experience that you've gone through this yourself. I mean, you've talked about that being important. I guess I always find myself curious when someone steps into a coaching or teaching mentorship type realm or type position. You know, I'm curious about what did it look like to get there? Why this work? So I am curious about some of your story and experience that led you
Sure.
to do this work.
Yeah. Yeah. The quick backstory. I mean, to answer your question in short, I've been through hell, my personal hell of healing. This healing's not fun. It's hard.
Yeah.
Okay. So I could talk about that for hours. But yeah, it's a war with yourself because your story, my story is a story of disassociation and misremembering, right? So I grew up in a house that if you asked me 15 years ago how was it, I'd say everything was great. No, I had a great childhood. And as I got older, I couldn't keep a relationship. I had sexual issues. I didn't know what was going on. So I went on a hunt for the truth. And my body remembered everything and it wasn't good. Let's just say, we'll label it good or bad. It just wasn't what I thought it was. And yeah, I mean, some sexual stuff that happened as a child that explained my life. There was some relief when I remembered because it explained why I was the way I was. But at the same time, it's one of the deepest betrayals that a child could experience. And this is 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men. This is an epidemic beyond human understanding that we do this to our children, families, a lot of times. Okay. So I experienced this. And I just went on a journey of remembering, understanding, grieving, which unlocked an incredible amount of empathy in me. I would call it angelic empathy. I can cry for any child that experiences this. And that's a gift. I don't sympathize. It's a big difference. I don't suffer with them. I want to help them and I want to protect them. This is my work. This is the body work we talk about. To get to this empathy, I had to alchemize that pain as we talked about. This is how God works. We have codes that we can unlock. Superhuman potential. This is what Jesus Christ represents. This is what a lot of the ascended masters represent. Our potential as humans. There's a lot of forces that are keeping us way beyond our potential, but it's superhuman. My empathy is a superhuman, compassionate capability that helps me to help people heal through body work. I never learned anything. I never went to a Reiki seminar, workshop. I paid probably 15,000 for different bodywork sessions and I never went. I lost all that money because God is like, don't learn anything. Your heart is unlocked because you earned it. And we all have different codes that are available to us if we're willing to do this work. I went to a therapist every week for 2 hours, 2 hour sessions. I drove an hour and a half in traffic each way, 5 years. And what he did was something called organ therapy body work, where he pressed incredibly hard on your body, past what you call character armor, where the trauma lies in the body. And he broke through it and you climb up the walls. This is what probably exorcisms were, or what we thought exorcisms were hundreds of years ago. This was people releasing suppressed emotions. And you scream and you rage and your body convulses and you don't know what's happening. And this is just trapped emotions and memories. Right? Because the brain will protect you, but the body knows The body keeps the score, as Peter Levine says. I did that. I did plant medicine to help me recall memories. I joined men's groups because I had father wounds that needed to be healed. And I need that brotherhood and that fathering from other men. I needed to see what healthy, vulnerable, conscious men actually look like because I didn't know. I need to feel what a loving man's touch felt like because I didn't know. And at the same time, I had to be able to sit in my home with my family, who I love deeply, and not feel triggered and not run away, and not feel sick and not feel tired. Forgive them, which is a tall order because we think we forgive and we throw that word around very loosely. But my definition of forgiveness is you love that person more now than you ever did. In spite of what they did for you, you love them more. If you feel that, you've forgiven because that means you empathize and you know that that person who did that to you was hurt and was probably more hurting and in pain than you were. And that's how they knew how to express their love in a perverted way. And that happens in so many different forms, in so many different fashions. But until you see it clearly, and until you forgive and understand that this exists in all of us, until you see that evil exists in all of us, you don't see humanity clearly, right? So that's been the journey, and there's way more to it, but I have always pressed pause in my life, Chad, because I could have gone and done master classes and this and that because I'm a sales guy. I mean, I could talk the walk and I could understand things analytically, but I always knew in my heart I'd be a fraud if I did that. So I waited years and years and years. I've waited until I had enough experience to actually talk about this from a place of fundamental truth. This is my heart speaking to you. This is God speaking through me. This is not nonsense. If I talked to you 8 years ago on a podcast, it'd be a lot of nonsense.
The journey, if we've experienced things in our lives, traumas, things that we carry with us for could be a majority of our lives. And you talked about this journey that you went on. How does the journey start? If people are if we're walking around carrying these things, living with them and not understanding the impact that they're having on our day-to-day lives, the way in which they're continuing to affect us. I mean, how does the journey start?
Yeah, I'm getting a little emotional right now because a friend of mine committed suicide on Tuesday. And fuck, man, like, it doesn't have to go that far. You know, to answer your question, I think it's rock bottom. I think it's when you hit rock bottom and you don't take that extreme, you're not ready to leave, but you understand it. You understand, man. Like I said, when you're in the thick of it, you know why people don't do it. You know why people numb themselves. I did it for 40 years. You know why they give up. You know why they'd rather go to prison. You know why they'd rather do drugs and risk their life because that's easier. It's easier to just exit as a man, especially because nobody gives a shit. And a man up. So to answer your question, man, I think there has to be a rock bottom. There has to be a catalyst. Something has to happen for that wound to start bleeding again. The scab comes off, and you say, I've had enough, man. I can't get out of bed. I can't keep a relationship. I don't know what it's like to feel love or experience love. I feel alone. This is how a lot of people feel. Let's be honest. Nobody wants it. Just because you see somebody smiling on the street doesn't mean they're happy. It doesn't mean they're healthy. We wouldn't have this issue with medications by these big pharmas that's keeping everybody sick if that was the case. So when you hit that point, you could only go up. And you have to realize, like, I could either live this like this for another 60, 50, 40, 30 years, or I could do something about it. And that's the mark of a true warrior. This is the people that you see that you will follow and I will follow because they took the hard road and they were on their back with nothing. And now they have love in their heart, they have freedom in their body, they have truth running through their loins. And most importantly, they have God. They have a relationship with God and they're not afraid to say the word. And they're not using synonyms for God like energy and source and universe because they're afraid to say the word. The fact that you're negotiating with that shows me where you are in your relationship with the truth. It's not about the word, is it? Not about that. That just shows your confusion. This is light that comes from your heart. And that light is under debris for a lot of people. That light is buried. And this is what evil is. Evil is lived backwards. That's what evil is. They're not living. They're disconnected from God. We all could do that. We could all harm other people if we disconnect from God. So this journey is really important. And I think the best that we could do in this life, like when I look at my life, I can only be a shepherd. This is what Jesus Christ was. And this is what Buddha was. They were just shepherds to show people how to live a different way, how to properly live as a human. These people represent our potential. This is why they're at the core of religions and philosophies. Not because we're supposed to worship them and go get on our knees. We can admire them, of course, but to emulate them. We have that potential. That's the whole point of these stories. In light, we are meant. Enlightenment. That's how we were designed to be.
Feels unfortunate, but yet I guess mirrors my experience that pain seems to be the ultimate catalyst for change. It's like I find myself wanting it to not be the case, but I look at probably the biggest catalyst for change in my life. My dad died when I was 17 years old. I was in high school, and that experience has been the biggest catalyst for change in my life. That pain has led me down what I believe to be a very different journey than I would have been down if I didn't go through that experience. That the pain of losing, of loss, and it just makes me think about this idea that I've just yet to find a bigger catalyst for change than pain, and that feels like it's unfortunate. It feels like I wish it didn't have to be that way, but I don't know any other way that people feel more galvanized to make a change than to, like you said, hit that rock bottom, experience pain.
Amen. I think you hit it on the head. I mean, that's it. I was on a podcast a couple of years ago, and I said, look, I'm going to say something that's going to trigger your audience, perhaps, but it's the truth. I said, trauma is a gift. Now, I understand a lot of people won't understand that. I do. I get it. I think if you told me that 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I'd be like, trauma's a gift. You don't know what happened to me, right? You son of a bitch, right? But when you get to a certain level of consciousness and you start unlocking the truth, you realize, yes, it's exactly what you said. How could you become powerful? It's like every superhero movie we've ever seen. How could you become powerful without some form of tragedy, without some form of accident in the lab? This is how it goes. This is the way it is. If you have this realization early on, you can now work on the only thing that matters, which is yourself. And then you could go on and do great things. Imagine the people that were running this country and running these organizations. had enlightenment. Oh my God. Imagine they took all their trauma from the past and now it has zero effect on them. They're totally in the moment and they've unlocked that power that came from that pain. We'd have a different world that we live in. But unfortunately, who is running these large entities? Think about it. Unprocessed trauma. Grown men, some cases women, of course, in little bodies. There's still those little children playing out that trauma. Unbelievable. This is the truth. It's not hard to see anymore. The vermin is beginning to scatter because the light's being shone on these people. There are people coming out and blowing whistles. We are living in that era of a great awakening. People are starting to see the truth. So now our next generation, they can be real change makers. And that's what I talked about with a war on consciousness, right? It's probably not a war we'll ever really see with guns and rifles. No, it's much more manipulative. It's emotional warfare. It's subtle. It's in the 5G that's being pulsed to us at all times. Tons of transmissions in New York City where I live. I have to have a shield over me, an auric shield to protect me. We all do. I don't watch these TV shows because they put codes in it. They even put it in Disney movies. I don't need to go into all of it, but you know what it is. It's everywhere and it's subtle because that's the way it's designed.
It's interesting, you just made comments that were positive in nature, an awakening coming. And in some of the, I don't know, it feels almost interesting, some of your comments of like consuming things, and it feels like there's a level of kind of skepticism towards things that are out there, but yet your message there was positive. Like the future seems bright. I don't know, how do you think about the future? And you've kind of said like the current state, some of the people who are leading organizations and the leaders in the world, maybe you'd prefer we're different, but you see the future being bright. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, see, for me, the reason why I'm not in the public eye as much is because I want to design movements, right? And maybe there'll be a point where I am, but we can't change old systems. I mean, they're massive and they're controlled by billionaires, right? But we could create new systems and we could create real movements. So, for example, how do we come into this world when we're born? It's not the way we're supposed to be brought into this world. Fluorescent lights, keep ripping out of your mother, someone else cutting the umbilical cord, putting you in an incubator, right? That's probably not the way we were designed to be born. How do we die? How do we live? Right? So we can change systems that we've just accepted to be normal. The food that we eat is toxic. There's landmines everywhere at the supermarket, right? So how do we create a movement around food? How do we create a movement around community? How do we create a movement around these franchises that help people live better? See? And now people are doing that. What happened during the pandemic? People started buying land. People got out of cities, started buying land. Some of them don't even know why they're buying land consciously, but they know subconsciously, right? So we have an intuition and we know things are changing. And, change, the way we look at time is very different. It might not happen in 10 years, it might happen in 200 years, but that's very close. And each generation is getting smarter, right? Homeschooling their children, growing their own food. There's a movement happening. And the only way to really create a movement is by, well, how do these other people create movements, these resistance? They get a bunch of people together, secret societies, and they build systems that benefit them. Well, why can't we do the same on our side? Let's start. Like I look at men's work. I used to be part of men's groups where the leader of the group would get all the money. He'd put it in his pocket. And now there's 30 guys in the group and we're all paying $5,000 a year, right? And we do it for 4 years. The leader of the group made over $500,000. just by leading a men's group on a Zoom call every week and doing a couple of retreats. No, it's nonsense. That's what I'm talking about. That's not a real leader. What a real leader would do is say, look, we could create something here. We got 30 guys. Some of these guys run a podcast with a bunch of followers. Some guys know how to raise funds. Some guys got different assets that they could tap into and networks. So yeah, you pay the $5,000, and that $5,000 is going to go towards investment. We're going to buy land. We're going to develop land. We're going to start businesses. We're going to build wealth. We're going to do this together. What happens in 10 years when you have that format and it goes from 30 guys to 300 guys? Money's not a thing. And this is what goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning. You really want to do this work, money can't be a thing. You have to find a way. I don't want to use the word hack, but you got to find a healthy relationship with money where it just becomes easy to get. Abundance is everywhere, and it doesn't become a problem for you, because if it's a problem for you, you can never do the work right. And the easiest way to make it not a problem is to start tapping into networks and communities and start doing things together, because there's power in numbers, and it takes a village. So just that little thing I just explained could create a big dent. Now, if you did the same thing through your own channel, and someone else did the same thing through their own channel, and now these mini movements are popping up everywhere, right? And then it all comes together eventually. This is how we create new systems. This is what you would call a renaissance, a revolution of sorts. We've got to stop fighting on the streets and think we're going to change Pfizer and Merck, and think we're going to change NYPD and the US government. You don't even know who your enemy is. It's faceless. You wouldn't even know where to find them. They live amongst us. So go build something. Go build yourself first, and then build businesses, organizations, families, land. Build. Design your life, not by your own personal will, but through God's divine will. Because if you combine your personal will with God's divine will, abundance will be abound. You'll never have to worry about money, because God's going to give you every resource you ever needed. And this is why I get triggered when I hear these spiritual teachers, in air quotes, talk about manifestation, because all they're doing is feeding people's egos. Whatever you want, you could have. And then you got women, men praying, God, I want $1 million. I want $1 million for me. Why do you want $1 million? Why? I want the love of my life. I need somebody in my life. I want so-and-so. I even heard a spiritual teacher say, you can manifest someone's husband. Everything is possible. Go manifest somebody's husband. That's black magic. That's what that is. Because you're feeding the ego. It's about what I want. I. Money, love, this. Yeah. You get that if you serve God first. You serve God first, your dreams will all be fulfilled. I know this, but you have to trust, and you have to surrender, and you have to say, God, use me, play me like an instrument. And my music's different than your music. That's the beauty of the world.
Do you ever see yourself getting out of the city?
Yes.
I'm curious about that. You know, when I was younger, I was really drawn to cities, as my wife Eileen and I we've been living on the road now for 2.5 years. And the more time we have in nature, the more I gravitate away from cities. In my vision for where we end up, I was just telling someone yesterday, they were like asking, do you see yourself in a city? And I'm like, my current vision involves a place that probably has no stoplights. That would be ideal. So I'm just curious, like, when I go into big cities, I don't feel good in my body, in my soul. It's just interesting how, you've got millions of people living from a proximity standpoint, very close to one another. And I always find myself wondering, but is there actually true community because of that proximity? yes, they're all there together physically, but is there actually a connection? Is there true community? Anyway, you say you would like to get out of, or you see yourself getting out of the city. Tell me about your relationship to where you live.
I'm born and raised in New York City. So I always say this usually at the beginning of conversations, like I'm just a knockaround guy from New York, I'm just a regular dude, and yeah, I love God and I talk about this deep stuff, but I come from, lower middle class family in New York City. I was walking around the streets, and so I'm a city guy by nature. That's not even the right word. Nobody's a city person by nature. I'm born and raised in the city. I'm used to it. But yes, as you begin to open, your field begins to open. I think might be what you're experiencing. You get called to nature because our inner nature and outer nature is the same thing. That's why nature, we're at peace and we're calm because we're in resonance. That's the most natural harmony of the world. That's the natural vibration of the earth. When we're in the city, we can't reach that. I can't even see the stars when I look up into the sky at night because of the pollution and the lights. So it is unnatural, especially for someone who has reclaimed their nature. So I am here for one reason, and I actually put a post on Instagram recently that said, hey, I got like a year or 2 years max. I'm done here. So anybody that needs help, I'm in service. Come by. My loft is open to everybody. Mi casa es tu casa, right? I'm here to build community. Because if I go up to the woods, I could very easily be a recluse. I could very easily be like monk-like, you know? But the truth is, New York City is where the people are. And it's where the people that need the most help are. Because it pounds you here. It beats the hell out of you, and most people can't handle it. So I'm here to build a community, meet like-minded people, and then exit, knowing that these people can come with me. You see? So I'm not alone in the woods. So it's a means to a means right now.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think there's chapters in life. Each chapter serves a certain purpose, and a lot of times the chapters build on one another, and you don't always know why in the moment, but you probably need whatever's going on in this chapter for the future one.
Amen.
Robert, thank you for joining me on the show. Thank you for sharing some of your story and perspectives. As we were chatting beforehand, it's meaningful to me to sit down with people that I've never met before and develop a relationship to some extent, and just try to figure out what is this life thing that we're all doing, and how do we make the most meaning out of it. So I find it meaningful. Thank you for sharing some of your perspective with me.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Friends, thanks for tuning in to my conversation with Robert. If you want to follow him, learn more about what he's doing, and read some of what he's writing, you can follow him on Instagram at rjcoachingnyc, or you can head to his website, robertjosephcoaching.com. If you haven't yet, I'd really appreciate if you took just a few seconds to leave a rating or review on whatever platform you're listening on. It goes a long way just to build some of the credibility of the show and help us expand the audience. All right, that's it for this week, and I'll see you next time.